Hello and welcome to Kelly's Wordy Reactions. So today I wanted to get straight into um, what we're going to be talking about, um, which is a pretty much a victim um, testimony. And this victim alleges that Les Wexner um, is responsible, him along with some others are responsible for um, some crimes against him when he was a child. So let's go ahead and get right into who Les Wexner is before we go to the victim testimony. So I am going to play a video, and well, it's a voice recording, so there won't be any video on the screen. Um, But before I get to that, let's talk about who Les Wexner actually is. Okay, just a second. Let me pull this down. Um, no, that's not what I want. Okay, let's get rid of this. Where did it go? There it is. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and get into um, Les Wexner. So, so as of February 18th, 2026, because the way that I've heard Les Wexner, talked about, especially with the inside of the voice recording that we're about to hear, I wasn't sure if he was alive or not. So, come to find out, um, Les Wexner was actually, um, what is this word? He was actually deposed today, February 18th, 2026. Or he says recently provided a 6-hour deposition to a House of Representatives committee regarding his past business relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. So Les Wexner is an 88-year-old billionaire and founder of L Brands. And under L Brands is Victoria's Secret, Bath and Body Works, um, maybe something else, but that's all it says right here. So, um, and yes, so as of today, he provided a 6-hour deposition to a U.S. House of Representatives committee regarding his past business relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Okay, just went over that. All right, so here's some of the latest details. So the deposition, Wexner, 88 years old, testified behind closed doors in Ohio to the House Oversight Committee, answering questions about his ties to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, who was his financial manager from 1987 to 2007. All right, so in response to allegations, so through a spokesperson, Wexner stated he honestly answered every question, reiterated that he had no knowledge of or participation in Epstein's crimes, and claimed he was conned in quotes, and duped, in quotes, by Epstein, whom he described as a master manipulator, in quotes. Um, okay, Wexner retired from his roles at L Brands in 2020 and 2021, but continues to be involved in investment and philanthropic activities with an estimated net worth in the billions. All right, his legal standing. Despite being named in the Epstein files and described in some documents as a potential co conspirator, Wexner has not been charged with any crime. Okay, so with that being said, let's skip over here to, let's see, where am I? Let's skip over to the man. Oh, I thought this was open. Just a second. So we're going to skip over to the video recording. Let's see. So I'm going to get that pulled up. All right, so let me just introduce this a little bit. Okay, so now if you want to look this up, this is on Lisa Volding's Substack, I believe. I get it to my email. I got the notification to my email, but I'm pretty sure this journalist, her name is Lisa Volding, and I'm pretty sure this is her Substack. But let's go ahead and introduce the person who alleges that he is a victim of Les Wexner. All right, so George, is it George or George's? We're going to say George. George Tonks. So a summary from, let's see, what did she name this? She named this, "He's Fine. They threw him in a dumpster." And this is, don't want to read the publisher's note or the summary. Let's go ahead and go for the summary. Okay, George Tonks, and I'm going to say alleges, she says it different here, but alleges that he was trafficked, drugged, tortured, and sexually assaulted by Leslie Wexner, Alan Kramer, and several pedophile associates during the late 1970s and until 1980s. George was 12 years old when he first met Wexner and Kramer. George was 18 or 19 years old when he escaped from the ring. George witnessed several hundred boys similarly trafficked and abused. The boys were considered aged out by 15. At pedophile parties held in Chicago playrooms, and playrooms is in quotes, George often witnessed abused boys carried out limp. George said that Kramer and his associates often joked of the limp boys, stating, "Oh, they just took him out. He's fine. They just threw him in a dumpster." George experienced difficulties discerning whether the boys had passed out or passed away. The torture and trafficking techniques George describes are similar to techniques used by Wexner, Epstein, Trump, and associates in different geographies during several decades. George's experience indirectly corroborates Sasha Riley's experience that I also um, did a video on. Let's see, experience, as well as several more victims I've spoken to. Victims were drugged, tortured, raped, and forced to participate in pornographic filming. Pornographic businesses such as the Bijou Theater are operational in some capacity today. The Bijou Theater maintains an active website selling vintage pornography. All right. And then I'm just going to read this last thing before I get to the recording. Um, Lisa says in her write up here, she says, as I have already stated, truthful testimony of what was seen and heard and experienced is not only evidence, but among the most important evidence. And while truthful testimony and supporting evidence is important and evidence of truth, the truth itself is evidence, essential evidence, primary evidence, fas prima, and the fraudulent systems that suppress the truth and oppress the innocent will no longer stand. All right, so let's go ahead and get to the listening. Okay, and so this is Lisa, and she's interviewing uh, George Tonks, Tonks. And I looked for it today. George Tonks's name is actually in the Epstein files. I did check on the DOJ website, and he's in there. I'm not sure to what all capacity because I wasn't able to go into each file and open it up and see what each one was saying. I do believe there was at least one that where he must have been mentioning an email because I opened it up. It looked like an email and I started to scan through, but I couldn't. It was a lot. It was like long, several pages, and um, I didn't see where he was in the actual email. But if you put this fellow's name in the DOJ website of the Epstein files, you'll see that he's actually in there. Okay. All right. So let's take a listen.
February 4th, 2026. I'm Lisa Noel Volding. I'm located in Canada. And go ahead, George.
I'm George Tonks. I'm located in New York.
Good stuff. So, what I'd like to do is provide you the spaciousness and opportunity to talk exactly about what you've experienced, starting from to the best of your recollection, from what you remember at when you were first abused.
Okay. Well, I grew up in Chicago, and my mother had me involved in the modeling and acting industry. I attended a Catholic school, the same school that the current Pope attended, and my mom would give me funds to travel back and forth downtown Chicago, and I would take the 36th Broadway bus to 95th Street. From 95th Street, I would go downtown. And at the time, I was very young, and my mom allowed me to roam the city. And I know that a lot of people have asked me, well, why did your mom allow you to do that? Well, my mom just never felt that anything was actually taking place, and she was very she was very trusting of everyone. So I would spend days going to the art museum. I would go to the park. I would just roam the city. And our neighbors in Chicago eventually moved downtown Chicago and on the north side of Chicago. And I would go and stay at their homes. And one of the neighbors moved into a building called Marina City, which Marina City in Chicago is the two corn cob looking towers. And at the time, the building was considered an upper class residence. And I was at our neighbor's house, Vicky's, and I would roam the hallways. There was like a shopping center downstairs in the lobby, and they had a sun deck on top of the roof. And I would go on the roof and lay out in the sun. And I just remember one day I was laying out in the sun, spraying, I had baby oil and oil on me, suntan oil, and I would spray myself down with water. And an older guy walked up to me, and he had a pair of Speedos on at the time. And he walked up to me. They were, not actual, the brand Speedos, but they were light Speedos. And he walked up to me, and he says, "Oh, you look hot. Are you okay?" And at the time, I was 12 years old. And he kept telling me, "Oh, you look hot. You look hot." And at the time, he introduced himself as David. And he said, "Oh, well, I have an apartment downstairs." And I went downstairs with him. And I'll never forget walking into the apartment. It was just unbelievable. When I walked in, it was all dark chocolate brown with chrome and mirrors everywhere and mummies throughout the apartment and gold Egyptian jewelry. The apartment held one of the largest private collections of Egyptian jewelry, and they had a piece of King Tut's chair actually in one of the display cases. And as I'm standing there, he offered me a soda, which I believe it was at the time a Diet Coke. And I started drinking, and I was just with David, and he was making small talk, and we went into one of the rooms. And I'm a 12-year-old boy at the time. And as we went into the room, he pulled my pants down real quick. But yet, I kind of felt like, when I look back on it, as if maybe I was dizzy and maybe there was something going on. And now when I look back, I realized that I was drugged, and I witnessed them drugging other boys as well. Mm-hmm. And he started performing oral sex on me. Well, he continued to perform oral sex on me, but I was out of it, and I wanted to go to bed. And I started laying on the bed in the room that we were in, which was a dark chocolate brown fur bedspread. And this was 1979. And finally, I wanted to go to sleep, and David started screaming at me that I had to leave. I had to get up. I had to go. And I left, and I went back to Vicky's house and went to bed. But before I left David, he had said that if I wanted to come over that night, he was having company. And he made me think that that was his apartment. and I believed that that was his apartment. So I woke up after going to sleep at Vicky's house, and as soon as I got up, I went back to David's apartment. I thought it was David's apartment. Now, that always bothered me that I actually went back, mainly because I felt that, I went back, so that's one of the reasons why I even hesitated to come forward. Mm-hmm. And Maria stated that, no, you were 12 years old. I mean, you were not aware of everything that you were doing. So I went back, and I'll never forget that night because I pushed the doorbell, and an old, ugly, fat man opened the door, and he had a hospital's jacket on. Mm-hmm. And he was totally naked, and he had like a black, wig on that Leslie Wexner would call Alan Shadle. And it was just it looked like just a black hat on his head. And I said, is David here? Who are you? And I was confused. So I said, isn't this David's house? And he's like, I saw David in the background, and David was walking around naked. Mm-hmm. So David had me come in, and Alan, I remember him saying that that was his house and that was his apartment. David lives with me. But David made me believe that that was his apartment. So Alan had me sit down, and they immediately offered me a drink, a soda. And I sat there, and the entire apartment was all custom. The penthouse was totally custom. All the furniture was done by Richard Himmel, who later on became Leslie Wexner's interior designer. Mm-hmm. And Alan sat there in the corner, and there were track lights shining down. And Alan was just sitting there naked, and he was huge. And he started interviewing me. He asked me about my mom, my dad, what my parents did for a living, if I was close to my parents. I told them everything about my family and went into detail about everything. And then at one point, Alan and David started undressing me. And even that evening, I felt like when I look back, they had drugged me again. And at one point, they started undressing me, and they used Lubriderm at one point for lubrication. I remember that actually laying on the floor. And they started penetrating me.
The Lubriderm
yes, that's
lotion?
what they used at the time. The Lubriderm lotion is what they used for lubrication when they were having sex. Mm. Sometimes they use oil, but most of the time they use Lubriderm when they were having sex in the apartment. And David and Alan, they were big, and I was a small boy at the time. When I look back, I had a very small waist. And Alan started penetrating me, and he became very rough and started screaming at me. And he started penetrating me, and I remember there was blood everywhere. And they had rags and towels that they were wiping the blood off me. And I was so out of it. David and Alan both penetrated me, and eventually I fell out and went to bed in one of the rooms. I woke up the following morning, and I felt that, I was so nervous and scared, and I had said, is something going to grow inside of me? And they started laughing very loud, and I really was nervous, I was scared, and I said, I have to go. And I went back to our neighbor's house, Vicky's, and I just kind of blocked everything out. And then I would say approximately a month later, maybe a little bit over a month, because when I met them, I was 12, and then I had a birthday on August 26th, and I was 13. So that was after my birthday. I was walking through the lobby of Marina City, and David and Alan yelled for me. And they came up to me and they pretended that they were concerned about me. Is everything okay? You stopped coming over. And they pretended that they were very interested in my well-being. And they said that, oh, we're having a party tonight. If you'd like to come by, you can stop by. And I did go by. I went to their home. And as I walked into the house, there were so many people that was unbelievable. And it was mainly all Jewish men and young boys. And a lot of the men were joking around or even saying that was my son, this is my son. And that's how they referred to the young boys as their son. And Alan and David would walk around pretending that they were like just having the time of their life with all these young boys. They enjoyed being around young boys. And then David took me in one of the rooms and started talking about the different people that were there. And he said, okay, Leslie Wexner's here with his boyfriend from Ohio. And he was letting me know all the individuals that were there. And at one point, Leslie started talking to me and took me into one of the rooms. Now, he took me in there alone, and I just assumed that he was there with his boyfriend, who looked like a native guy, had a long hair, and I thought it was his boyfriend. So as I'm in the room, it was a room with Greek pottery, original Greek pottery. And Leslie would pick up the Greek pottery and he would turn the Greek pottery around and point on the Greek pottery of naked men. And he would say, oh, look at the pee-pee, look at the pee-pee. And eventually, Leslie started undressing me and started performing oral sex on me. He wanted me to perform oral sex on him and I refused. Mm-hmm. I just couldn't do it. I just never performed oral sex on anyone. And he performed the oral sex, and afterwards, it was as if nothing had happened. Everyone was walking in and out of different rooms, but yet at the same time, Alan had multiple apartments in the building. So they would go down to different apartments with different people having sex. And then later on, a lot of the guys that were there that would come to the parties, they worked for Leslie and Alan at their companies, at their stores. One in particular was Jesse, and Jesse would go around to different bars where runaway boys would go to, mainly from like Nebraska and Iowa for some reason, and they would pick up young boys. One place was called The Flight, where John Wayne Gacy would pick up young boys and bring the young boys to the different parties. Now, all of them were not interested in young boys, but most of them were. And then David also would go to the bus stops to pick up young runaway boys. They would go to a youth group, which at the time I think it was Gay Alliance. And it was a youth group that gay underage boys and girls would go to. And they would pretend they were counselors to bring the young boys to the apartment. And to meet Alan and Leslie and whomever was there. Now, they also had a female. Her name was Audrey. And Audrey would teach the boys how to give head. Okay? And Audrey would convince straight guys boys that it was okay to have sex with men. And she would train them and convince them that it was okay. And Audrey would actually allow the young boys to have sex with her, but eventually they were having sex with Leslie and Alan, and all the other older men.
What tactics did Audrey use? What?
Audrey was just a beautiful female, and she would actually just make them feel so good, and she would come out and say, make it look like everyone was bisexual. Everyone liked boys and girls. And they had books of, like, I know this sounds crazy, but they had, like, binders of every boy. They would take Polaroid pictures of us and put them in these binders. She would actually take the binders out also and show the pictures of the boys to the other boys. But the binders also had girls in the binders, but I never witnessed any young girls.
So you only ever saw the young boys.
I only saw the young boys, but she used the girls in the binders to convince the other boys that it was okay. And then you have to realize that they wanted me to bring my friends to meet different guys also. And I remember I brought one of my friends, Harry, to the apartment, mainly to show him the mummies, because the mummies were, like, unbelievable. And it's strange because the mummies would smell at times. And they would always say the reason why the mummies were being removed was because they were being taken to a museum to be on display.
Mm-hmm.
But the apartment would sometimes smell because of the mummies. Which, when I look back on that, that's kind of odd that the mummies would smell.
That is odd, because the preservation techniques on the mummies, that after thousands of years, there wouldn't be a smell like...
A smell, exactly. And then not that long ago, I was researching the collection that Alan had because it was so hard for me to find anything about the collection. And I had even contacted the Art Institute because there was a big show that Leslie Wexner went to, and they claimed that they did not have any information. But I did find information about the collection. And it talks about the pots that were actually in the collection were actually pots where they kept the internal organs from the mummies. And I had posted that on my Instagram account and my Twitter account for people to see.
Wow. So I'm gonna pause right there. It sounds like the lady Audrey, whoever she was, she kind of sounds like the Ghislaine Maxwell of, of this situation. And then I don't know if you heard that part about the mummies. What he was saying at the beginning was that these men whose apartment he was in had literal, like, mummies from Egypt and some other artifacts and things like that from the Egyptian tombs, or this is what he was told. So listening to all of this, um, keep in mind that this man, George Tonks, he was only like 12, 13, and 14 years old when these things were happening. So he's got really good memory, to have been as young as he was. And I could imagine why, because, so much going on. It's so foreign. It's traumatic. I can definitely imagine why he remembers it so well. However, everything that they were telling him might not be true. So he's also saying that sometimes there was a smell and he didn't understand why sometimes the mummies would actually smell. And I'm thinking, well, that's probably because, um, or not probably, but it could have been because um, it was, something or someone or some parts of someone that would maybe start to decompose after a while. Because, it's just really, telling all of what was going on in there. So, and then just to think back, he's 12 years old, 13 years old. They could tell him pretty much anything and he would believe it because he's so young. He didn't have, a lot of experience to measure against what they're telling him. Um, so yeah, poor fella. All right, let's get back into it. Uh-oh, let me see, 18. Well, that's the only thing about this, the way it is. I hope I can get back into it. Let's see. It's not real player friendly.
The collection that Alan had, because it was so hard for me to find anything about the collection. And I had even contacted the Art Institute because there was a big show that Leslie Wexner went to, and they claimed that they did not have any information. But I did find information about the collection, and it talks about the pots that were actually in the collection were actually pots where they kept the internal organs from the mummies. And I had posted that on my Instagram account and my Twitter account for people to see.
Were the mummies encased? Were you looking at the mummies just with the wrappings, or were they were encased? They
had one that was undone, a small mummy of a boy. Okay, that was actually, the case was open. And then they had large cases of, larger cases of mummies, larger mummies that were sealed.
Mm-hmm. And did they ever talk about whether the cases were opened at all, or did they talk about preservation? Did they ever talk about mummies?
No, they would just use the collection to show everyone and try to impress everyone. And at the time, I was not really I knew nothing about the jewelry collection, but I do remember Leslie Wexner pulling out a book of King Tut's tomb, a book about King Tut's tomb, and showing me where there was a piece of King Tut's chair that was in the collection that was published in the book, where you could see where the piece was missing off the chair.
Mm-hmm.
And they had it in the display case. And then when I sent a message to Juliet, who's an Epstein survivor, she says, that is very strange because in New Mexico or something like that, she thought that there was something going on. So she says that's very creepy when it comes to mummies.
Mm-hmm.
So other than that, okay.
Did she tell you what she thought was going on?
No, we were direct messaging each other on Twitter.
Well, let me ask you, when you noticed that the mummies smelled, did you notice, how often do you recall?
I remember, the mummies smelling when it would start getting warm out, or when they had the doors open, or just they would start smelling, and then the mummies would disappear, and they said that the mummies were being taken to a museum to be on display. And what's really strange, too, this is what's really strange, okay? The entire place, the apartment, and even Alan's house in the suburbs and a couple of other apartments in the city that he had, there were cameras everywhere. And they said the same thing that later on, this is how I kind of like knew what Maria was telling me was just so factual, because Leslie and Alan, I had started questioning a lot, and I had asked them why there were so many cameras. And they said that the insurance companies would not insure the artwork unless there were cameras throughout the apartments and the homes. And that's why there were cameras everywhere. But Alan would, in one of the closets, you had all the recording equipment from the cameras. He would take the tapes and send them somewhere. And I have no idea where they were sent. But he would send the tapes somewhere.
Do you have any sense of how often he would send the tapes?
No, I didn't even pay any attention to it. I just knew that he would package them up, and he would have to take the tapes. He would take them to his store, which was Kramer Furs, and they would ship the tapes out from the shipping department at the store.
And the store was called Kramer First?
Kramer Furs. Kramer, and then Furs, Furs. And then Kramer Furs, okay. Yeah, so that's what he would do with the tapes as far as having them shipped. Wherever he shipped them, I have no idea.
So right here, he's saying that they had these video cameras that would tape what was going on in the apartment. And then he's saying that ever so often they would take the videotapes to somewhere called Kramer Furs. Let's see if I can find anything about Kramer Furs. This is really and he was in Chicago at this time. Chicago, Illinois. Let's see. So Kramer is widely recognized as a vintage brand of high quality fur coats, often found in the resale market. And that's because there's no retail location currently operating under the name Kramer Furs in Chicago as of 2026. So, but that doesn't surprise me, because he's saying that this was going on in the 70s and early 80s. So there was a Kramer Fur. What if I ask, when was Kramer Furs operational in Chicago? So weird. Okay, let's see. All right. Looks like his memory might not be right on Kramer Furs. Because I can't find any history for it. But from what he's saying, that or whatever the name of the business was, he's saying that they would take the videotapes from what was going on in the apartment and drop them off at this furrier. So I don't know. I can't find a Kramer fur right now. Anyway, that's quick research. Maybe I'd have to go a little bit deeper. Okay, let's see. Every time I go out, I have to get all the way back in. Let's see.
The tapes to Kramer
There it
Furs.
is.
Tapes were shipped from Kramer Furs to locations you weren't aware of.
I was not aware, but there was something else really strange too. And I don't want to go too off into another area, but okay, Alan. Okay, because I became part of their little circle, and Alan would, in the middle of the night, he would get up and have to go. He would get phone calls, and I would stay at Alan's house sleep overnight. And he would get calls in the middle of the night, and he would have to go and meet with individuals at a synagogue on Lakeshore Drive. And he would always say that he has to meet with Israeli officials. So in the middle of the night, he would go to a synagogue and meet with people. And he would, at times I had to sit in the car and wait while he was having meetings. And at one point it was so cold out, and I was sitting in his car, and I was so cold, and he wouldn't let me come in. I actually just got out of the car and actually started knocking at the door, and they did let me sit in the lobby. And so there was so much going on, and it was so strange because as soon as I came in contact with the entire crew, and they were very proud to refer to themselves the Jew crew. They had no issues with that, and that's what they would call themselves. Mm-hmm. So when I came in contact with the crew, you would not believe how much they did in one day. It was like they went to bed at around 1 a.m. and they were up and out by 6 a.m. I mean, as far as there was no sleep at all, and how they were able to do so much. I know that they were using drugs, like mainly Librium, which is not an upper, but Alan used to use speed. I never actually saw Leslie use speed, but I did witness Leslie use Librium. And what Alan would do, and Leslie would joke around about it too, Alan would put speed in the coffee of his salespeople at the store, and he would joke around about it because he would say that they would be able to sell more if they were high off of speed.
Were they ever aware?
Sell more clothes.
Were they aware of the methamphetamine in there?
No. And they would joke around about drugging the goyim. They would always refer to non-Jewish people as goyim. And they would always talk about how stupid my parents were. And before I met them, I was close to my mom and dad. I didn't have any problems with my mother and father. But they would convince me that my mom and dad were stupid goyim, and they were constantly repeating that. So my relationship with my mom and dad at the time changed. And then they would make us watch tapes, old Holocaust black and white movies, and later on they were color movies, and they would make us watch these movies, and then they would talk about the goyim and what the goyim did to the Jews. And it was just, there was so much going on. And then on Sunday morning, they would actually dance around the apartment whenever Leslie would stay at Alan's house. And Leslie had apartments in Chicago, but at times he would even stay at a hotel. And Alan and Leslie would dance around the apartment watching Baptist, like Black Baptist Church show Sunday morning. And then they would joke around, and Leslie would go, "Oh, ha, ha, ha. There's a Leslie Wexner dress. There's an Alan Kramer fur coat." And they would dance around the house watching Black Baptist church shows with people jumping up and down and clapping.
Well, got to pause for the cause on that one. So he's saying, it sounds like he's saying, let me just go back, because it sounds like he's saying like it was a practice for them that every Sunday morning they would literally watch Baptist church on TV so that they could basically mock the black folks in black church wearing things that came from them. Let me make sure I got that right. Go back just a couple minute or two. No, that's too far. Okay.
Because he would say that they would be able to sell more if they were high off of speed.
Were they ever
They
aware?
would sell more clothes.
Were they aware of the methamphetamine in there?
No. And they would joke around about drugging the goyim. They would always refer to non-Jewish people as goyim. And they would always talk about how stupid my parents were. And before I met them, I was close to my mom and dad. I didn't have any problems with my mother and father. But they would convince me that my mom and dad were stupid goyim. And they were constantly repeating that. So my relationship with my mom and dad at the time changed. And then they would make us watch tapes, old Holocaust black and white movies. And later.
And as far as this word goyim, this is something that I've seen in the Epstein files as well. I think technically it means everybody else who is not Jewish, like as in like the Jews and the Gentiles, or I think, I don't know. But what he's saying is that it's a very derogatory, extremely derogatory term for everybody else who's not a Jew. So, and that's also how it seems when I've seen it in the Epstein files. So let's go on and see okay, so he's getting to this black church part.
Later on, they were color movies, and they would make us watch these movies, and then they would talk about the goyim and what the goyim did to the Jews. And it was just, there was so much going on. And then on Sunday morning, they would actually dance around the apartment whenever Leslie would stay at Alan's house. And Leslie had apartments in Chicago, but at times he would even stay at a hotel. And Alan and Leslie would dance around the apartment watching Baptist, like Black Baptist Church show Sunday morning. And then they would joke around, and Leslie would go, "Oh, ha, ha, ha. There's a Leslie Wexner dress. There's an Alan Kramer fur coat." And they would dance around the house.
So they're looking at the, hold on, let me make sure screen keeps going for some reason. So they're looking at the black church on Sunday morning as a practice dancing around, I guess, when it comes time for the music or the high worship time, and looking throughout the audiences to see who's wearing something from one of their collections. Mm, my. And all of this is very mocking and derogatory. Okay, let's carry on.
Watching Black Baptist church shows with people jumping up and down and clapping. And they would make fun of them. And that's what they looked forward as far as doing Sunday morning.
He said, and they would make fun of them, and that's what they look forward to doing on Sunday morning. This is wild and crazy. Um, I mean, but yeah, I mean, what do you expect from people that are doing this to children? So, um, I guess the thing that can't be lost on me is um the fact of, people spending money with people that are, I mean, just all of this, involved in all of this, and um, do what they do and believe how they believe and feel how they feel. Yeah, this this bears some paying attention to. Okay, here we go.
Which was odd.
Yeah. With the films, the Holocaust films, how many boys would watch a film at a time, and how many boys would you say were generally there, that you recall at any moment?
At any moment, there were like no more than approximately 5 at a moment. And they would try to keep us separated, and they always wanted to keep competition between us. I mean, like, for instance, when they had a party, there were a lot of boys. And we're talking like a lot. We're talking like 15 to 20, maybe even more at times. Now, the parties, the mafia parties, there were a lot of boys. But when it came to just us watching the Holocaust films, at the most, I remember maybe 5. And we would sit around. They had a sofa that was built in, and we would sit there, and they would make us watch these movies. And then they would talk about everything that the Goyim did to the Jews and how horrible Goyim is.
With the other boys there, do you remember anything of their backgrounds? Were they?
Okay, I was always looked upon like I was put on a pedestal. A lot of them were very poor, and they were not from wealthy families. Most of them were runaways that were actually like staying at friends' homes that Alan set up as far as them meeting their friends, and they would stay at their homes. And for some reason, I don't know why, you had so many of them coming from like Iowa and Nebraska, and they would actually have Lance go to Iowa and pick up boys and bring them back. Lance was Lillian H. Florsheim's hairdresser, and he was originally from Iowa. And he would actually go to Iowa and meet boys and bring them back. Now, how he met them in Iowa, I don't know, but he would bring them in from Iowa. They had them living in apartments everywhere with older men, or even in the beginning, they had them staying in hotel rooms at the Abbott Hotel in Chicago on Belmont, or they would have them at the YMCA on Chicago Avenue.
No.
Because,
go ahead.
Yes. A couple of times, I would actually go and sleep at the YMCA on Chicago Avenue. Okay, and it was crazy because they had a theater called the Bijou Theater, and they created not adult films, but they created like films with young boys, underage boys. Mm-hmm. So they had these films that they created at the Bijou Theater, which they did photograph me there, and the FBI has those photographs when they raided my apartment in New York, because I had the photos in an accordion file. I had a few of the pictures because they had given me photos and I had kept them for years. Mm-hmm. And I was nude. I was very young at the time. And they would send boys to the Bijou Theater to be photographed. And then later on, they made it very clear that they would send the videos to different adult sex shops throughout the United States. And they were filmed in Chicago. And see, that's what a lot of people don't know either. That Chicago was like a main hub at one point for the gay community in the 70s and early 80s. Mm-hmm. And it was a very leather scene. There were leather shops, S&M shops. And what's strange, though, is the amount of young kids that were runaways back then. And they were like for instance, if they were gay, they were coming from all over the Midwest, and they were coming to Chicago.
With the boys that,
like a hub.
Yep. With the boys that you would, so no more than 5 at a time. What sort of length? Watching the movies. And during what length of time did you what was your recollection with those boys? During how many months would you see them? Were there times when you wouldn't see them? There would be more boys brought in. What was your sense of the sort of turnover?
That's what everyone was scared of too, because everyone was scared that they would be pushed out of the group. And they played so many mind games with us as far as comparing us to different boys. And everyone, it seemed like all the runaway boys and were always looking for an older guy to take care of them. Mm-hmm. So the boys, for some reason, they were not there that long. They were in and out within a few months. And they would come and go. At one point, I remember they even had me. They wanted me to fly to San Diego and meet with one of Alan Kramer and Leslie Wexner's one of their antique dealers. And I was kind of scared to go because I was very young and I didn't want to go on the plane by myself. But they were actually sending the boys around to their friends. Mm-hmm. And I remember one time I did go to Toronto, and it was kind of scary because I was young, and I did fly to Toronto. And the boy.
So sending the boys around to their friends is actually trafficking. This is a lot. This is a whole lot of. And so, what I'm keeping in mind with this is this feels like it even predates Jeffrey Epstein. This Les Wexner, he's 88. Let's see, how old? So how old would Jeff Epstein be if he were living? And also, he's not really connecting. He's not really connecting. Let me see. Jeffrey Epstein to his story, but we know that Jeffrey Epstein and Les Wexner were associated with one another. So yeah. So if Epstein, oh, let me see, 19, uh, that's been 7 years. So he would be 73. Wait a minute, 7, 13. Yeah, he would be 73 or right around 73. And so then, yeah, so the other guy, Wexner, is a full 15 years older than Jeffrey Epstein. So later on, he's going to talk about how so many of the things that they were doing were very similar. And he feels like Jeffrey Epstein was potentially like trained by this man. Um, and it's just so funny to hear. Where did it go? To hear that just today, Les Wexner said about Jeffrey Epstein, he said, through a spokesperson, Wexner stated he honestly answered every question, reiterated that he had no knowledge of or participation in Epstein's crimes, and claimed he was conned and duped by Epstein, whom he described as a master manipulator. Wow. So let me just let him get to the end of what he's saying right here. This is very long, so I'm going to listen to this and talk about this in parts. Let's see. Where are we? It looks like it's about two, another 1, 2, 3, almost 3 hours, like another 2 hours and like 40 minutes of this interview. So let me see what the last part of what he's saying is, and then we'll cut off and we'll come back for another part of this on tomorrow. Okay.
Place where they would even like with us boys, we would experiment with each other in different rooms. Mm-hmm. So they weren't just having sex with Leslie or Alan or Richard Himmel or Harold Simon. We would actually experiment with each other also.
I have a question about the FBI raids. What year was the
Okay, so before she gets into that, I'm gonna wrap, but I'm gonna just say this. So he says we were experimenting. Okay, so he's now he's gone from the perpetrators or the predators doing whatever they're doing to him and the other children, um, to being in rooms with other children while they while there's no adults, and all the children just doing things with each other. And so what comes to mind for me is that was probably encouraged in order to, among other things, get them on film And so that was also part of whatever these films were that they were curating and then turning around and putting out in various shops all over. So this is just, it's so bad in so many different directions. It's kind of stomach turning. Who is the victim being interviewed? So this man's name is George Tonks, Tonks. And I was saying, maybe before you got in, that if you go to check and see if his name is in the Epstein files, it is. I checked it earlier today. I didn't have time to read and find out what all it was saying about him on the DOJ website where the Epstein files are. But his name definitely, if you just put his name in there, his name definitely comes up. So um, it's not like he's not connected in there. He is, and I'm gonna go ahead and play more of this tomorrow. But in the meantime, this is on Substack, and definitely, support this journalist that does her Substack and gets these interviews. Her name is Lisa Noel Volding, and she's interviewed this young man. She's interviewed another man by the name of Sasha Riley. And Sasha Riley had a very compelling story to tell about being adopted and trafficked by his adopted parents. And he has a long interview with her as well. And he names several of our current politicians as people who abused him. He talks about being on ranches and at farms and being taken to these events by his father, who was a pilot. He claims that his father would fly planes and helicopters for Epstein to different places, and that he was trafficked within these parties and events that they would hold, and um, and he remembers his parents basically selling him from the time that he was around 6 years old, I think he said. And then around 9 years old is when he said he remembered his father and mother letting him know that they were going to start dealing with the rich people. So Sasha's interview is over here on her Substack as well. So, all right. Well, I thank you all so much for stopping in, and we'll continue on with listening to this and this discussion um, on tomorrow. So, all right. Once again, thank you so much for stopping by, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye bye.